reproductive rights are under assault in the United States. And what's worse, the rationale put forth by the Supreme Court to justify rolling back nearly 50 years of precedent, that there's no implicit right to privacy in the Constitution, lays the groundwork for a full court press on a host of other settled cases. Deep Listens is taking action, and we need your help. Of course, we want you to learn about the elected officials in your area and vote in every single election, but we'd like you to consider contributing to the national network of abortion funds as well. The NNAB is a clearinghouse of regional abortion and reproductive health organizations across the United States. Their goal is to remove financial and logistical barriers to abortion access, centering on those looking for assistance and organizing at the intersection of racial, economic, and reproductive justice. You can contribute to the NNAB directly at abortionfunds.org/donate. You can also use their site to locate an abortion fund in your area so you can keep your money local and aid your neighbors. Thank you, and now back to your regularly scheduled podcast. Hello, good people. Welcome to Off the Deep End, a Deep Listens podcast where we plumb the depths of role-playing video games. In depth. My name is Jeff Rude, the host, and the Tom Hawk of this operation. Joining me, as always, we have the Whip Plus of the show, that is Braden, Arbitrary Water Redacted. Hello, Braden.
Hello, Jeff. I have been sick the entire last week.
Oh, no.
I have a rash covering my entire body of unknown origin.
Your body is not of unknown origin. You've met your parents. You were stone certain where your body is from.
You're right.
We are but star stuff, Braden.
Okay, Moby.
Just shoot me in the head. Also joining us, as per usual, it's the old Bitfist himself. It's Chris Zombie Pyrodactyl. Hello, Chris.
You know, I know this is going to be my third stab at trying to understand the concept, but I think it dawned on me. I think I finally get game juice, okay? I bought some grapes, and I ate them, and they were delicious. And then I realized that what makes the grapes delicious is the juice inside of them. Because when you remove the juice, you get raisins. And raisins are pretty butt, because they got no game juice. But grapes have game juice.
There is a Korean grocery chain called H Mart, and they have a location.
Wait. They're called H Mart?
Yeah.
And memes? Are there memes?
There probably are. I doubt they knew at the time when that name first came into existence, but yeah, come on. And they don't sell media. It's like all food. It is a proper greengrocer. But anyway, there's one pretty close to my place of employment, and they had in the produce section a container of Muscat grapes. And this container, I'm going to say it was probably about a pound of grapes, like give or take. And that container was $30. And I did not buy it, but I have never seen such a good looking cluster of grapes in my adult life. Like, they were perfect, huge, nice light green, perfectly spherical, probably would blow your mind eating them, and that's not worth $30 to me. That's my grape story. I like raisins too, but that's because I'm secretly 85 years old and like fruitcake. Hey, if you didn't notice the cool names of random robot parts that we use to describe the various visages of this program, that's because we're going to be talking about BioMotor Unitron today. That's right, it's BioMotor Unitron. It was developed by Yume Kobo, and it was published by SNK. It was released on the 15th of April, 1999 for the Neo Geo Pocket Color, ? In Japan. And it was subsequently released in North America and Europe, also in 1999, probably. Europe dates for the Neo Geo Pocket Color get a little weird. But wait, there's more. We're also going to be talking about potentially two other things, but primarily one, which is towers.
Jeff.
Oh boy, Braden.
Jeff, remember when we were like, oh, we don't know if we have another, enough to talk about to fill a full podcast. And I'm like, hey, I was reminded of this weird Game Boy Color game Thanks, Jack. I know you're listening to this. This is your fault. I want to be clear. You there, posting old scans of gaming magazines in the Discords. This is your fault. And so I recommended we play Towers Lord Banif's Deceit.
What's Towers Lord's Banif Deceit?
It is a Game Boy Color port, a fully functional port of an Atari ST dungeon crawler for the Game Boy Color.
What if I were to tell you I have that sweet, sweet, sweet release date right here in front of me, too? This was originally developed by JV Games Incorporated, and it was originally published by JV Games Incorporated. That's right, double duty there. It was released sometime, probably in 1994, as mentioned, for the personal computer, presumably Windows DOS, and Atari ST.
It was the Atari ST version, and then MS-DOS, and then Game Boy Color, just to correct.
Okay, so we started off on the ST, that the platform of platforms, the king of second place Euro 16-bit computers, subsequently released for the Game Boy Color on 13th June 2000 by Vatical Entertainment in the United States, and a little bit later in Europe. That's it. That's the bill. We might talk about the sequel briefly. Look, this is a fun one. This was a patron request, actually. Well, not a patron
Towers
request.
was a patron request?
This wasn't a patron request. This was from a person who wrote in, whose name was Jamie Morgan, if I'm not mistaken, who wrote in regarding Aiden Chronicles: The First Mage. As you recall, the Aiden Chronicles coverage on this led to a listener email where they described working with a faculty person who was involved in the development of Aiden Chronicles. And as a thank you for their email contribution, I said, please send us a game. And they said BioMotor Unitron. So this one's for you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And thanks, everyone. And in that bold spirit, if you'd like to be a part of the committee, which tells us what to do in terms of putting games onto the RPG slush pile, there's a 3-step process. Step 1, go to patreon.com/deeplistens. That is a place where you can kick money to the Deep Listens family of shows, all of which are in one handy little RSS feed. That's great. It will also get you access to a super secret Discord, which includes all of us and most of the people who have ever recommended us games. If you get that Patreon total, your monthly contribution to the $3 level, you can recommend a game. We will put it on the slush pile, and we will draw from that. We will be not drawing that pile out at the end of this episode, but the one following that, we're kind of going A, B, A, B, A, B pattern. So we are on B, we're going back to A with a committee of the three of us game selection after this. You can also send questions via electronic mail. You can send those to inquiries@deep.lol. That is inquiries@deep.lol. If you'd like to see the fruits of the labor of the Off the Deep End initiative, which I'm decided it is an initiative, that is on bit.ly/OTDE rank. That is bit.ly/OTDE rank. That's the intro. BioMotor Unitron. Where to start?
We played this instead of Armored Core
We did play.
6.
I mean, it wasn't a recommended game, so that wasn't
Armored
even.
Core 6, I would not call an RPG. It's pretty good.
It seems good. I played Armored Core 3 once. Is it better than Armored Core 3?
I played Armored Core 3 recently, and I
even wrote about it.
And wrote about it on the internet. And I'm here to tell you, I accidentally did the thing where I played all the Armored Core games as like I'm gonna get way into this franchise before the new one comes out, haha. And then the new one came out and did some things, some very specific things that annoyed me because it wasn't like the old ones. But also, I think Armored Core 3 and its expansions are
heel
probably
turn. You had a heel
the height of that series. Yes.
Okay.
BioMotor Unitron. Go ahead.
All right. So in 1995, a video game multimedia endeavor called Pocket Monsters is launched in Japan.
Go on. I'm not familiar with this. What is it like?
Okay. So there's these cute little critters like Lizardon and Pikachu.
So these are monsters.
Yes, there's
started
monsters that they fit in your pocket.
Started with two colors, blue and green.
So
But
how
then
do
in
they
America,
green.
they didn't think green would work, so they went with blue and red.
how do they fit in a pocket if they're a monster?
You put so these Pokemon, as they are called.
Like a spoonerism there
Yeah.
of some sort.
Yeah. So you put them in these tiny balls, right? And then
They live in the balls.
they live the balls.
There are
and you
multiple
gotta catch
anime
'em all.
episodes that talk about how when they're in the balls, they're actually happy because there's like some sort of like virtual reality program that keeps them in their natural environment, even though you've technically ripped them from their families or friends and
They enjoy cockfighting.
now engaging them in battle.
So you're saying in Pokemon the pee is stored in the balls.
So that game was a pretty big deal, let's say. Pokemon. How old were
One
we
might
when
say
Pokemon
it's
was
one of the
huge?
most important multimedia franchises of all time, but who's to say?
Yeah. Like an unavoidable video game thing that like barely requires explanation.
Okay, so the thing that the at least the American side of the Pokemon company does these days that I think is fucking insidious is a lot of their goofs and bits seem to specifically call out, let's say, millennials in their 30s and early 40s,
Just as if they know
almost as if they know
where the butter
where
from the
the bread is
goes.
being buttered,
Yes.
Outside of an inexhaustible supply of children who all play these games.
Yeah, it's but also like certain types of collectible stuff that became normalized,
Yep.
especially with younger audiences, with
the
the dawn of
life-size
Pokemon.
Furret
Yeah,
plush
I
you
mean-
can get for $400.
Ish.
but there is also we don't need to go into it. Although BioMotor Unitron is a reflection of the '90s to early 2000s, skewed to what we would call modern pet culture, or like not. And I'm not meaning that in like a weird thing, but like foregoing child rearing for these pets that are your like life companions. There's the Japanese pet boom in the 2000s and late 1990s.
Oh, this is what Shinzo Abe was about.
Yeah. But anyways, so the Game Boy Color has a killer app, basically. And at first it was the Game Boy, and the Game Boy had Tetris. And I think people kind of have forgotten with the dawn of like Pokemon, have forgotten how big of a deal Tetris was in terms of just moving the original Game Boy, even if there were, hardware wise or technically wise, better alternatives, whether you're talking about the Lynx or the Game Gear, eventually like the WonderSwan. But like Tetris was huge.
Yeah. Lest we forget too, Pokemon came out early
Late.
enough that it predate like Pokemon Red and Blue in Japan were Game Boy games. They were not Game Boy Color games originally. When they were finally translated and released in the West, they came out more or less on top of the Game Boy Color. But they were not Game Boy Color games. They were base Game Boy games, which was part of not the entire reason why they were as successful as they were, but kind of a big part of it, because you had this baked in audience of like the millions of Game Boys that were already out there. It was a good last send off for that piece of hardware.
It was also it also coincided with a massive multimedia push, the likes of which Nintendo was not exactly trigger happy about. Sure, Mario had an animated television show that was on morning television, but Nintendo's relationship with multimedia tie-ins in the late 80s to early 90s was on again, off again. But with Pokemon, they went ham.
Yeah.
I mean, that show had an anime that was one of the most highest rated television shows during its time slot. Well, I mean, the likes of which was never really matched with children's television.
They're still making it.
They're still making that.
It's actually pretty good. Last couple series were pretty good.
Yeah. Look, we have to talk about it. Like the Pokemon trading cards were at one point selling more than Magic the Gathering.
The Pokemon trading card game is indirectly responsible for the death of, let's say, a lot of mid-tier RPG publishing in friendly local game stores, because Wizards of the Coast did the Pokemon trading card game for a while, and they said if you don't stock our D&D 3.5 stuff, you don't get the fucking Pokemon cards. And so that edged out a lot of smaller publishers when brick and mortar retail still mattered for, let's say, tabletop RPGs.
But
just,
anyways,
just the market, just raw market force.
Yeah, the invisible hand.
Yeah.
So SNK
And it has a
is a weird
Shin Nihon something.
Shin
Koseki.
Nihon Kikaku.
Keikaku means plan.
They decided to get into that weird crease of the 16-bit color handheld game. So they were putting themselves up against the Game Boy Color. Was the Game Gear at this point thoroughly out of the market?
Game Gear was basically dead.
Okay.
But
this
also
is,
the Wonder Swan was out.
the Wonder Swan was definitely big in Japan.
And yeah, the Wonder Swan actually mattered in Japan.
And the Atari Lynx was dying a death by 1,000 cuts. So
it was well
The
dead by this
Atari
point.
Lynx had a bullet in its skull by 98.
Yeah.
That hardware was finished in like 85. It was very, very, very dead.
But the Neo Geo Pocket Color was important for a couple of things. Despite its like failure, it's an influential system. It had a solid library, a ton of really good MVS and AES ports, and kind of saw the dawn of like the SNK versus Capcom series, as well as like King of Fighters R2.
Yeah.
So just a bunch of really good games on it, but it just struggled. I think the introductory price point of $70 for that thing was also kind of intimidating. But it had a lot of really good arcade ports. It had a decent launch of 14 games. I think that was a record at one point, and it sold very well at the start, but it got almost no retail support in the United States. And outside of SNK, the development for the Pocket Color was poor, let's just say.
Wow, it's almost like SNK's fortunes at the end of the 90s.
Yeah,
were pretty
and
bad.
That was the other thing, is like SNK was in the midst of possibly filing for bankruptcy. They would later kind of package themselves as Playmore, and then Playmore became SNK Playmore. We won't get into that, but
it's a whole
Pocket
thing.
Color was an interesting system that just never really kind of cracked its crease in the market, despite the fact that hardware-wise, it was an incredibly well-designed system. And someone apparently, a part of SNK, was like, we need a Pokemon thing. We need a Pokemon thing. Who will take our money and make us a Pokemon thing? And that's when Yumi Kobo or ICOM.
So they were
yes.
ACOM. AACOM. It is romanized as AICOM, but it is ACOM, which is a weird one. So yeah, Yume Kobo, you're like, they seem to have sprang out of nowhere in the late 90s. No, they had been around for about a decade prior to that as ACOM, making games that you may have heard of if you are into sort of like the second and third tier NES stuff, or the TurboGrafx, or the Neo Geo. Like, standout things that they made early in their career include the Legendary Axe on the TurboGrafx 16, which is, it was EGM's best game of 1989. That's something. They also made P-47 Thunderbolt on the TurboGrafx 16, which is among the worst shooters on the platform.
They made a bad Golgo 13 game.
Yeah, they made two. They made both of those, I think. Didn't they make the first one?
Great. God,
no, I don't think they did. I think they made the Moffat Conspiracy, which is just the sequel.
Those Golgo 13 games on NES, Jeff, are really bad.
And then they get into the Neo Geo space in the 90s. They make Viewpoint, which is a neat-looking game. It is sort of a Zaxxon-like, without the altitude, and then Polestar, which gets a follow-up around the time they get their name changed to Yume Kobo, which is called Blazing Star. Another neat kind of, I would say, R-type adjacent, but all pre-rendered sprite game thing. They made Prehistoric Idol 2, and they died pretty much around the time SNK died. They bound themselves very tightly to the fate of SNK at probably the worst time you could do it, right at the end of the 90s when their arcade business was slowing down. and they launched this like very noble but ultimately easily shunted effort to fight against the Game Boy and also the Wonder Swan. Just ill-fated. But one of the things that sprang from their loins was this weird little Pokemon-like thing, BioMotor Unitron. So this is like Pokemon, but it is not like Pokemon, really. Like, the things it has in common with Pokemon are light RPG mechanics, dueling of other monster creature things, some kind of, sprite-based, very grid-based navigation of overworlds. That's about
Rock,
it.
paper, scissors weaknesses.
Yeah, there's a
item refining also.
Is there refining in the early Pokemon
or
stuff?
not item refining, but like crafting mechanics?
I'll admit I have played Pokemon Shield. That is the only one I have played. That's probably the only one I'm ever going to play.
I think that what is also a big differentiator between BioMotor Unitron and Pokemon is that I feel like BioMotor Unitron is much more upfront about its Dragon Quest roots. The structure is much more dungeon crawly, and we'll talk about the pseudo randomness of the dungeons, but the fact that you are controlling a single avatar, which is your robot that is piloted by either a male or female character that you pick at the start, and even has different racial backgrounds and starting stats if you pick a different person. But it feels much more rooted in a more traditional RPG versus Pokemon, which is trying to strike this more mainstream pet culture meets Dragon Quest format.
Yeah, I would hazard to say this feels a little, just ever so slightly more targeted towards the teens and tweens than maybe Pokemon is. Like, when I think Pokemon, I think this is like perfectly appropriate for like, kids from about the age of like 8 up. I think that the overall image of the Neo Geo Pocket Color was like a slightly more premium product with things targeted towards people who are interested in like, I want to have a good version of SNK fighters in my hand, which is not a thing that a lot of like 8-year-olds are saying.
I mean, that was the SNK brand for almost everything that they made.
It's the thing they had.
That was the thing they had.
What was SNK good at, Jeff? It was making 2D fighting games.
The weird thing is, though, is that the Neo Geo Pocket Color was priced $10 cheaper than the Game Boy Color. Because they were trying to undercut the Game Boy Color by introducing a new product into the market. So, like, the Neo Geo Pocket Color was $70, whereas the Game Boy Color was $80. Did it help? No, not at all.
Like, literally just Pokemon alone dragging that thing. So, like, the launch of the Game Boy Color, the vibes around the Game Boy were, it's hard to really describe if you weren't there. Like, there were other handhelds that existed in this entire lifetime of that platform. The little portable PC Engine dude, the Game Gear, the Lynx, and they functionally didn't exist. Like, I think I saw maybe like 2 Game Gears growing up. Never saw a Lynx, never saw a Pocket Color. Wonder Swans didn't really exist over here.
And that was the thing about Nintendo, is they understood that ultimately what this is going to come down to is, do we have the games that can move these units? Can we price it to where children can ask their parents to buy it for them without pricing out those parents being able to buy them? And just strong first party and second party and third party support. And that's the reason why, even though the Game Boy, technologically speaking, was vastly inferior to the Game Gear and the Lynx, and even, the Game Boy Color was to the Wonder Swan and the Pocket Color, they were able to get out. Getting back to like BioMotor Unitron, it is an interesting game that I feel like, unlike Pokemon, you can feel its disparate parts and what it's pulling inspiration from much clearer. Pokemon feels like its own crease and type of pseudo hybrid, like its own little type of RPG, whereas BioMotor Unitron, it's like, you pulled this from that, and this from that.
Braden, how did you take to the kind of, I guess, show-gothy nature of BioMotor Unitron?
So, as someone who has played a lot of Armored Core this year, when you tell me, hey, this robot, it's got all these parts, and you can kit bash different parts together, a spark ignites in my brain, and I go, well, I need a better power supply. Thankfully, though, this is a game for children, and thus, thanks in part to watching ZP play it, I just bought the best stuff early on.
Yeah, I feel like the weird thing is that as an adult, I can see the weird ways that they made this for a tween to teen. Like, there's a lot of weird bespoke pathways. Like, if you want to get everything in this game, it will take you hours upon hours and days upon days, possibly months. But if you're like us and you just want to go from beginning to end, it's a pretty breezy, well-paced package. Like, that was the thing that I liked about this. More so than Pokemon, is there's just a nice, decent snappiness, quickness. The fact that you're not having to develop these teams and you're just building this unitary kind of singular robot thing that can have different stats depending on what you buy was cool. The parts of it that start to break apart, we'll talk about later, but it's the initial premise and the start of this game is cool.
So yeah, you pick a race at the start of this with some pretty incredible Neo Geo Pocket Color art for each one of them. You can be a cis boy or a cis girl. I was an elf person from the woods. There are fish people, there are lizard people, there are normal people, and there's another one I'm sure that I've forgotten.
There's furries.
Furries, there you go. Furred people. Your initial robot gets some stats based upon that choice, which is cool. You've kind of spec yourself in a direction with that choice. It is a meaningful choice. I like those. That's always cool. And you are thrust into a very, very menu-based town, and kind of a menu-based world. Like most of the world that exists in this game is like raw, menued-out abstraction. There's not a lot of wandering to like a Pokemon trainer. There's not a lot of wandering to like a Poke Center. It is quick and snappy and breezy. I think it helps it out a lot. And very quickly, you are thrown into your first tournament. Like the time from starting this game to meeting all the NPCs to go fight some stuff is like maybe longer than I would have wanted, but it's like 10 minutes, right?
I will be honest with you. I set myself up. I talked to everyone. I heard someone mention if you go outside of town, you can visit the forest, and I actually did dungeons before I played the tournament. And I learned very quickly that right from the rip, you have to be careful because there's actually a preferred order in terms of how you go about exploring those outside dungeons. Some of them are harder than others. And then when I came back and bought some stuff, I found I was way too overleveled for that rank E tournament and basically myrtleized everybody.
Yeah, it's not a particularly hard slate of enemies. So the overall structure of this game, to really zoom all the way out, there are 6 tournaments that you will be pushed through, basically. In between those tournaments, you are gently encouraged to go explore one of 4 randomly generated dungeons in one of 4 areas, each of which has sort of an environmental, this is the fire area, this is the ice area themes, which, yeah, there's rogue DNA in here. So fight, go to a dungeon, pick up random stuff, go back to your garage, your menu-based garage, kit bash parts together that you found in these dungeons with stuff you bought in the store with all the money you picked up, and then use that to beat the next tournament. After you can finish 6 tournaments, a final 7th dungeon opens up, and that is like the actual end game. This can all be accomplished if you are, let's say, making the most utilitarian decisions in under 10 hours. Probably closer to like 7 or 8, which is neat. I think where it gets a little bumpy is
The structure of those dungeons.
If you don't like randomly generated dungeons, it's too bad.
It depends on how they are randomly generated, Jeff.
Yeah, so full disclosure, I was shared basically a guide that I then shared with all two of my co-hosts, and it is basically the recommended BioMotor Unitron speedrun tactic of getting through all of the ranks and beating the final boss. Now, the complication here, and apparently this is the reason why BioMotor Unitron has a semi-active speedrunning community, is there's an element of chance to this because you have to rely on drops and also specific encounters in the game. And sometimes you'll get lucky, and sometimes you'll be like, I need a unit of platinum right now, and it's not dropping anywhere at all. Also, this floor plan that I'm on right now, there's no chests that I can readily access, or the random encounters are popping off so quick that I just want to eat my own eyeballs out. So there's a lot of randomization, and when I was just organically exploring the multiple floors of the dungeons on my own, it's like, oh, this makes it refreshing and fun and kind of like everything's a new little encounter for me. And then when I actually had to do the RPGing, I had to get into the RPG mindset, I found it incredibly annoying.
Yeah,
and I know that there's a certain level of min-maxery there that is my fault rather than the game's fault, but it makes certain things that it even directs you to do, right? Like finding different body parts for your mech. Like there are only so many different ways that you can mash things together to get different arms and guns and cannons.
Yeah.
And it makes that process slightly difficult in a way that's not exactly great.
And like a little hard to palate because that the kit bashy part of this has an element of chance baked into it as well. It is pretty heavily slanted in your favor, but unless you are using a guide, which, hey, you should maybe do that. If you are just kind of playing this blindly and quote unquote honestly, a way you could go about this is manually saving your game and then bashing pieces together and hoping that it doesn't fail and then determining what those combinations make and then just like reloading over and over again until you're like proccing things that you actually think you need to get through the next thing. Or you can just use a guide. Just use a guide. There's a lot of parts in this game. There's an awful lot.
There are a lot of parts, and not all of them are even useful. Or there are a lot of like bespoke evolutionary dead ends, and I don't know if that was just intentional or if that was like it's like something that came out of a game that's doing this
dead ends
style
and kind
of RPG.
Of like blind alleys and just kind of redundant. Like this is a fist that does 40 damage, and this is also a fist that does 40 damage. Kind of like, we needed both of these, huh?
Tournaments work, whether it's rank E, D, C, B, A, S, whatever the rank is, ultimately all of the enemies, other than the very last one, which is like, you're going to fight the hardened version of every possible element and then some. Each tournament has like a expressed elemental affinity. And if you just figure out what that elemental affinity is or look it up, you can really just skew your character to like use 2 items and then just be good.
Yeah, you can smoke those tournaments.
And so that leads to like this weird feeling of like, yes, I am exploring and I'm learning and I'm collecting. You really need like a third or maybe even less than like a quarter of the items that are available to you to actually get through this game.
Yeah. So unless you are into the such that there's a collect-a-thon, collect-em-all aspect to this game, I guess that's kind of it. It's like I want to build everything. There's just not much incentive to do that, really.
And I don't know how the rest of you experienced it, but like once you get really powerful, like you get 2 arms onto your robot, you can either do 2 different attacks or you can have a defensive thing in one arm and your main attack on the other. And if you just get like general magic blocking thing in your arm, you're good. Like you ain't gonna take any damage.
You basically also only have 2 moves.
Yeah.
Which is half as many as a Pokemon has.
And they don't even animate as flashy as the Pokemon moves. It's the cool little robot parts, but it's not as dynamic as Pokemon in a lot of ways.
And keep in mind, we're talking about Gen 1 Pokemon animations here. Like, as I recall, the sprite just kind of moved a little bit.
Jiggled
Oh,
back
yeah.
and forth,
Yeah.
and then
Oh,
shot
yeah.
a laser beam, or
Yeah.
like sprayed some stuff. Like
we
but-
are about on that level here.
but it was more dynamic than a lot of the stuff that you saw. That said, though, Jeff, some of those random encounter sprites are pretty awesome.
They are. That's like the strength of, and this goes back to the Neo Geo of it all, right?
My absolute favorite has to be the penguin with the gun. That thing.
Handgun.
The way you can
Gun.
like disassemble and reassemble these parts would show up not, in real time in the classical sense, but
It's like a paper doll inventory.
yes, it is. You are building a paper doll of these random
And
parts. And
We
it's
have all
kind of
expressed
awesome.
before. We love paper doll.
Yeah, they're some of the best parts of CRPGs is being able to
Why do you think Might and Magic 6 is our #1 ranked game?
Yeah, it's even better when you can see it.
What if the paper dolls were weird FMV people?
What if that guy threw up? So I think it's cool. I just the dungeon crawly part of it is where you wind up spending, I guess, a disproportionate amount of your time. And it's sort of in there where you start clanging into, like you said, it sure would be nice if it procced the one thing I came into this dungeon for. There's an encounter every 4 paces. This layout is just kind of displaying some of the worst 8-bit sort of, Dragon Quest clone dungeon design.
Yeah, there are a lot of labyrinthine floor plans that are like, I need to pick up some raw materials, and my best bets are to get them from chests. And you showed me this chest on the upper right hand corner of the screen, but obviously I've got to snake around to get to it. And when you're needing to pace your resources and there's a sense of challenge, that's one thing. But this game's difficulty curve drops like a bag of rocks, or it just drops incredibly once you start crafting the upper tier defensive armors and accoutrements to your robot. And then also it really is just you mashing the same attack over and over again. On top of that, there is some basic RPGing when you go back to the town and finish a stadium, but it's very basic. You interact with certain characters. There's the waitress in the bar and she's giving you baked goods, and then there's the master-like figure who's going to teach you moves. And I always pick the wrong move because you always want to be attacking in this game. You always want to be attacking in this game. You always want to be attacking in this game.
Yeah.
And learning those healing and restore spells are a waste. They're a trap. They're a trap. They're a trap. Just learn how to attack better.
Yeah, you are pretty well served by the healing abilities and items that just come to you just from exploring the dungeons most of the time.
My problem of when I was not attacking was when I was running out of magic juice.
But even then, you've got abilities that you can
2 bars
claw some of that back. Yeah,
health and special attack, and you can use a move to restore, but you're better just at like using items or just getting through the encounter before you run out. But yeah, it's a pretty basic story. They tried to put in some decent visuals, especially when you're exploring and talking to people. And I would say I got my fill getting to the end. I know that this game ends with the death of the last boss, and then it basically presents this new game plus opportunity where you can get all of these legendary items by clearing out the dungeons multiple times, but I just did not. But yeah, special story. Like, this story is bog simple. You beat the tournament arc, and then there's a big bad evil dude. Then the big bad evil dude possesses the flower salesperson lady, and then she gets possessed, and then she stops being possessed when you beat her. And then you fight Master Computer, who's controlling the robots, and then you free society. This game takes place in the post-apocalypse.
Yeah, in the tradition of Crystallis, another SNK hit, it's the post-apocalypse. In the tradition of good games that we have played, ultimately it's a computer that's running things.
Yeah, it's Phantasy Star 2, Mother Brain,
it's
stuff
Magic
like that.
6 again.
Yeah, it's fine. It's a story. It's for kids. Like,
yeah.
Does anyone ever like talk about the world building of Pokemon other than the weirdos that really like Pokemon? No. it was cool. I don't think I hated my experience with BioMotor Unitron. I think that it speaks volumes that this is a fan pick, and we were thinking that this would justify an entire episode. And it's like, let's play another game.
Yeah.
Oh
Like-
boy, oh howdy.
I enjoyed my time with this too. It is slight, but I kind of appreciate the slightness. I think it's exactly as deep as it needed to be. I kind of wished the random dungeon crawly stuff was a little less integral to the
think
experience.
It's neat.
It is neat.
There's a sequel that
There
only
is a
came out in Japan.
Yeah. It's
Maybe we'll look
Kiko
at it.
Sekai Unitron. I looked it up. So certain parts of it have been well translated. I think there are certain parts like battle commands that are only 40% translated. So the fan translation for BioMotor Unitron 2 is like anywhere between 40 to 50% done. But it looks cool. That game, they definitely pushed the hardware further than they did with the first game. And I'm told that the story is a little bit more in-depth. But yeah, it's you're going to have to use this fan translation that's only partially complete.
So, we're at a crossroads. Do we want to put BioMotor Unitron on this list first, or do we want to talk about Towers, Lord Banff's Deceit, and then do them both?
Let's rank both of them at the end.
Okay. We're transitioning into talking about title number 2, which is, as mentioned up top, Towers, Lord Banff's Deceit. I cede the floor because I spent not a ton of time with this, but I did play it for a couple hours on a commute.
So yeah. Great.
This comes from JV Games, who are were/are small game dev who in the early 90s were mostly working on Atari stuff.
Well, they started out with Atari, and then when the Atari's computer and console line died a death by 1,000 cuts, that's the second time I've said that, they decided to find a crease of porting console and PC games to the Game Boy and handhelds. They did the Game Boy Advance port of James Bond 007 Nightfire and even that Warhammer collectible card game. And then they kept going, and in the turn of the century to the early to mid aughts, they were a WiiWare developer, making I believe they made one of those bad Carnival Games clones.
They still exist to this day. You can buy a repro cartridge of Towers 2 for the Atari Jaguar,
which we'll talk about,
for $90.
Anyways, so this game started out as Braden mentioned, as an Atari ST game in the early 90s. I believe 93 was what I saw. It was later ported to the MS-DOS or Microsoft DOS, and then eventually the Game Boy Color, with some pretty significant differences with each. But the overall premise of this is that it's a single-player dungeon crawler in the same vein as Dungeon Master, in a pseudo kind of three-dimensional environment, in this case a dungeon, or a castle, Lord Banff's castle. And it is broken into two different things that you need to manage. The free movable mouse version of the game, where you're operating a cursor and clicking on things on your screen, or selecting spells using the weird scroll that has fuzz do ra on it, or managing your inventory. And that's the only way you can manage your inventory, is if you click the free mouse movement option. And then the HUD, the actual in-combat version, where you are navigating the dungeon and then clicking to attack. And it's a linear game, even though it's a dungeon crawler. In a lot of ways, this and also Towers 2 reminded me of Tower of Druaga, because very often each floor, in order to progress from one to the next, you have to find some sort of bespoke secret entrance or bespoke secret trinket or a legendary weapon that you can very easily miss, and then you'll be stuck up against an horrible dragon that will kill you. And the combat is in real time, even on the Game Boy Color, which is novel and kind of impressive that they were able to get that to work. And you roll to create characters, and there are a lot of non-playable characters that you can either talk to or kill. And it's bad.
The thing about this game is like, I think in let's say the hierarchy in the pantheon of, computer dungeon crawlers from this time, I don't necessarily think it ranks. It ain't no Eye of the Beholder, okay? It's no Lands of Lore.
No, yeah, and it's like I was asked when we were streaming. I was streaming this, and you were a part of this. We were asked like, what is the intro to one of these, which is the early 3D first-person dungeon crawly? It's probably Lands of Lore, right?
Yeah,
it's probably Lands of Lore. Like
maybe
people
we'll
who
play
tell
Lands
you
of
Pools
Lore
of Radiance,
Who knows?
they're evil people. I love Pools of Radiance, but no. But yeah, it's probably Lands of Lore. This game.
Yeah, this game. So the reason this game is notable is because they shoved an entire one of those onto a Game Boy cartridge,
which in and of itself is impressive. I do admit that part.
It is very Lord's Prayer on Grain of Rice-esque what they have accomplished with this thing.
But nonetheless, the thing that just makes this game not work is that weird management of the pause to move the mouse cursor and fiddle around with all of your inventory items and the magic system into like switch your different modes and means of combat, and then going back to actual in-game combat. Like just the simple process of picking something up, putting it on your person, and then the weird way that this game goes about managing inventory slots. Just a lot of weird bespoke things. And then on top of that, the UI for this game really gave me some Ultima 4 vibes, like the Vitruvian Man inventory system with the different circles. Braden maybe knows what I'm talking about. Like this felt like Ultima 4 and Ultima 5.
It's one of those things where I think the control limitations of the Game Boy Color are the most damning aspect of this, because if you took those away, if I didn't have to like scroll a tiny ass cursor across these abbreviated terms,
yeah, and it is an agonizingly slow scroll.
Slow.
Like, hey, I bet if I played the Atari ST version of this game, would probably have a better time.
Yeah, I
with
mean,
a mouse.
Like, there's no acceleration on it. It literally just kind of pips. I don't know. It's probably like a 16 by 16 like sub area grid that this cursor moves across the Game Boy Color screen. Which again, for those who didn't know, for those who didn't own one or were not alive at this time, was a fairly small, not backlit screen. It was almost uniquely ill-equipped to play handheld video games on in some ways.
Yeah.
The idea of moving that little cursor around and playing this game
in a car.
Yeah, just waiting for the next street light to be able to successfully put the loaf of bread into your inventory sounds like agony.
Yeah, and also it starts you with a shockingly limited inventory system, despite the fact that there is like some sort of hunger mechanic where you constantly need to feed your guy. And then like the way it goes about that is this weird bag system or bag of holding system where you have to keep using bags and bags of holding in your top slot, but if you put them within slot, they do nothing. It's just such a weird bespoke way to do that. I also felt like the level ups and the experience point gains were too slow. Like I felt by the time I moved from level 1 to 2, I had already killed like dozens of people and probably should have gotten stat growth or a level up like ages ago.
Yeah, I stubbornly continued playing this until I hit level 2, just because at a certain point I was kind of blown away at how long that was taking, and I was like, I at least have to put in that much time, at the least. And at that point, I'd found the key to get out of that first floor. and mapped out the whole thing and, had engaged with the systems such that they are in there, except for the part where it's like, gets to level 2 in an RPG that has levels. Like, it's a lot. It asks a lot.
Yeah, and there's a lot of backtracking because there's times where it's like, I've come up against these golems, but I can't beat them because they're only going to be able to take damage if I have a specific magical move or a specific enchanted sword or axe. And I don't know. I thought that the map filling aspect of this game was poor. It was not a rewarding experience. And like I said, there's a lot of Tower of Druaga milieu in this game because there's like trap floors and blood spots and pressure plates and magic mines and false walls and keyholes. And none of that is especially easy to find or locate. And the maps that you do fill in are horribly colored. Like the color choices in this game are bad.
It is.
So
it's a kind of a, like, the Game Boy Color palette. It they added color to this thing, but it was not a full. It was an 8-bit system. There's a Zilog Z80 under the hood of that system, and it was kind of a NES-esque palette and NES-esque colors. And the shades that this game kind of defaults to are a lot of these kind of weird, fleshy, orangey, pinky, green.
A lot of greens.
Just very unpleasant to look at.
On top of that, the interface and the fact that you have so little real estate dedicated to the actual combat screen, and you have this big chunky area where you see this scroll for your spells, which you have to queue up. You have to proc before combat starts, and then you have your guys, like little inventory slots and food slots, and then the display for what's on the screen. Like, good Lord, if I had played this on the original Game Boy, how small would that battle screen be? Like, just trying to reinterpret these blobs so as that I know what I'm looking at. And then just, it's kind of a slog. It's not rewarding. It's got next to no story after you hit the start button. And exploring the dungeons are not fun. It just really likes to kill you.
So thanks, Braden.
You're welcome, Jeff.
What a neat thing. It is.
It's cool that they did it.
It's cool they did it. It's
Just
honestly, it's one of those, like, it's technically probably one of the more impressive Game Boy Color games if you really appreciate just what it is trying to do on what is a pretty limited piece of hardware. It's just the thing that it is just kind of unpleasant to play.
Unpleasant to play. Unpleasant to, like, listen to.
Oh yeah, the music loop is also
it's like
very
8 notes.
Very mutable. Like, I can't sit here and say it's like abject, terrible, bad game per se. It's just very uniquely ill-fitted for the platform. And the process of getting it on there, I think, made the game worse. Like, clearly. I can't speak to the PC version of this game at all. But I can say this was not great. But wait, there's more. Because, why let sleeping dogs lie when you could have another go at this and do it again? So there was nearly the sequel on this platform. And we're not going to dig too much in depth about this, except to say Towers 2, which is a game you can legally play, is notable for being, amongst other things, the Jaguar RPG, as in the Atari Jaguar. One of the more notable Atari Falcon releases, which was kind of the last iteration of the Atari ST.
They also ported that game to Game Boy Color, but then the publisher went out of business.
Yeah.
So it was never released.
Well,
but they have put out the ROM for it. You can play it.
So that's the weird thing about both Towers 2 and, like, the Jaguar. So a couple of things. So first off, yes, this game was developed by JV Enterprises, which later is the developer. It is the developer that we just mentioned in terms of JV Games. It's the same thing. So as Braden pointed out, their publisher JT Storage, which you'll get a kick out of this. JT Storage was one of the primary makers of IDE hard drives for personal computers. Jeff,
Okay.
do you remember IDE drives?
I have one not on this desk, but in my storage closet right now, for potentially updating an original Xbox again.
But they were the let's say the inexpensive, like even below who's the person like WD, like they were well below that. They just made mass storage for IDE hard drives for like any system on the cheap. And later, one of the people who founded JTS Storage, Tom Mitchell, went on to form Seagate.
Okay.
And when JT Storage went bankrupt, JV Enterprises, thinking that this Atari Jaguar was going to be the big thing, and they ended up just buying them in a reverse takeover, which then allowed them to port the game for the Windows, and then eventually continued to own their own destiny, I guess, of sorts. It is a third-person, fully 3D video game, one of those. It is using the same engine, which is the whole direct order system where you have to use a mouse cursor to pick things up and put them into slots and manage your own little inventory stuffs, and then real-time combat. It's the same format, but now everything is 3D, and there's a little bit more telling of a story. And rather than pull inspiration from like Ultima 6 or 5, it's now pulling inspiration from Ultima Underworld and maybe this game you've heard of, Kingsfield.
Yeah, or like Daggerfall's probably not the right comparison, but
Arena would be good.
Arena,
Dungeons and Dragons, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Slayer for the 3DO.
Yeah.
But like, no, this felt like that, like what you saw of me playing Towers 2, Braden, felt like Arena.
Yeah,
It felt like a worse version of Arena.
Yeah, it was definitely like drawing from that same, like, we don't want to make our RPGs turn-based anymore because even in the mid-90s, game developers were running headway again away from the idea of having to take turns. Take turns were uncool. They were un-90s. Newt Gingrich hated turn-based combat.
He hated it so much he was
Famously.
married to it briefly. That's a joke about me.
God.
Pew, 90s jokes.
Yeah.
And
he did
just
love
like
it, then it got
cool-
cancer, and so he divorced
Yeah.
it. That's another Newt Gingrich joke.
A cool, like, and much
What are
like
you,
a cool
the leader of Working
skateboarding
Designs?
God.
dinosaur.
But anyways, no. So Towers 2 is same as the first game, where it's secretly linear. Each floor, again, requires you to pick up bespoke little trinkets and items and find hidden invisible walls and doors and put keys into locks and kill certain enemies before moving up to the next floor. It has the same automatically filling map kind of subsystem where you can pull up a map and see where to go or guess where you need to go or assume where you need to go by saying, yes, the upper right-hand corner, the nodule here is completely empty. I bet if I check this wall out, I'd be able to find a new center, and that's going to have a teleporter. I played this game on accident because I looked up Towers, and I immediately got this game called Towers 2, started playing the Jaguar game instead of the game that we were supposed to play, Towers 1. And I gotta say, this game, Towers 2 is the same thing in terms of just being technically impressive. We might actually play this again another time, but it's technically impressive, poor execution. The weird, like, end note to Towers 2 is that, again, JV Games is still operating. And they got it within their head that they are going to do a reissuing of Towers 2.
Reissue.
And not only doing that, they're going to print these on carts that you can then insert into Jaguars and play them old school ways.
They doubled the amount of memory, and so apparently the game runs at a better frame rate. Like, I respect the hobbyists who are like, yeah, we have enough fondness for this old game we made 28 years ago, and now we're going to reissue cartridges for the Atari Jaguar. a console only the sickest of human beings will ever
It should be
own.
noted, though, that the Atari Jaguar emulating games on the Atari Jaguar not only has been solved, it maybe has the most complete definitive emulator I've ever seen because,
it's very
surprise,
fun
surprise,
because of Atari 50.
yeah, the person who made that emulator was the designer of the console. Atari, in a weird move that I wish was a standard, made the entire Jaguar and all of their previous computer OSs completely public domain. And so some of the people who worked on the Jaguar are like, I don't want this part of my life to die. They reverse engineered and then re-released an emulator that almost one for one does perfectly emulates everything that's been released on the Jaguar. Now, if you're going to ask me, does that make the games good? No.
But it is wild they did it.
They did it.
It's I am almost on principle. The next time that thing goes on sale, I am probably going to wind up buying that Atari 50 thing.
It's
just
a cool
because it
thing.
is. It seems very cool. It seems like a way that I could fool my partner, who, God bless her, she loves me, but I don't know if she really cares about Atari. But I think the documentary angle of that could make it a good family fun time. And yeah, then it would be excuse to play Cybermorph, which is insane. With achievements, with genuine Xbox achievements. That's really something. This, I will say, Towers 2 on the Game Boy Color has probably the most impressive Game Boy Color title screen I have ever seen.
Yeah.
Because it is just basically a GIF of raw footage, presumably from the title screen of the Jaguar or Falcon version of it, compressed to all hell. But it is, rotating around sort of a like Stonehenge set in space vista. But it's moving at like 20 or 30 frames a second, and there's text on front of it. It looks kind of awesome. It's a shame you wouldn't have been able to see it on a Game Boy Color screen. But, again...
kind of like the Game Boy Color release of Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare.
Yes.
Yep. That thing is technically impressive. Unfortunately, it's still that game.
The Resident Evil 1 port that they were trying to do at a certain point as well.
Yes.
Which I think that's out there to poke around at.
Yeah, a prototype of that is out there.
So that's Towers 2. We're not ranking that today, but suffice to say it exists, and it is extremely, extremely weird. But we've kind of got its weird older brother already on the docket. Both of the games we have talked about are now about to be put onto a list, which, for those of you who are near a phone or near something with a screen, can look at yourself. It is at bit.ly/OTDErank. At the top of this list, we have games like Xenosaga Episode 1, Dervils Are Mocked. And above that, Suikoden the First. And above that, our favorite game so far, Might and Magic 6, The Mandate of Heaven. At the bottom of this list, we've got a block that I really wonder if we're ever really going to break up very much. Secret of the Stars by Tecmo, Aiden Chronicles, The First Mage by H2O Entertainment, and Unlimited Saga by Square. So I would like to start with BioMotor Unitron, if that is okay.
Yes.
And I would like to start at about the midpoint of this list, which right now, let's say, is Nox.
I think I had a more fun time with this game than Nox.
I agree. And I will even go ahead and say we can skip over Hybrid Heaven.
Yep.
I'm feeling pleasant today.
I think it's better than Risen. Here's where I think. So above Risen is Dragon Quest I, Digital Devil Monogatari. And those two games, I think, are more appropriate to rank against BioMotor Unitron. What do you think, Braden?
I would rather play. As the Piranha Bytes boy in this call, I would prefer Risen over BioMotor Unitron. However, I cede the floor because you two seem
okay, Jeff. If you would rather play Risen, it goes below Risen. I think that
How
BioMotor
German do
unit.
you like your video games,
I
Jeff?
would rather BioMotor,
I think I'd BioMotor over Risen.
Yeah.
but
I-
not
You
over
don't have enough
Monogatari.
Riz. That's what the kids say.
I just think that Monogatari is like fusion and like demon negotiation stuff is more rewarding and more.
Oh yeah,
fun
no,
than
I think
robot stuff.
Yeah,
OG Megami Tensei is better than this.
that's. I don't know, man. Risen endorses slavery in a way that I'm a little weirded out by. That's when I see Risen on here, that's what comes to mind. The same reason I felt weird about True Blood at the end when they were like, sex slavery is a cool punishment. Actually, it kind of poisoned my view of True Blood.
Well, that's why we put Jade Empire as low as it is.
Yes, so that's where it's gonna go.
It's gonna be the new 19.
It's gonna be the new 19 BioMotor, which I've seen stylized as one word. And I've seen stylized as 3 words. And I'm going to go with the one word, BioMotor, Unitron, intercapped, Bio, capital M, motor, on the Neo Geo Pocket Color 39, I think. Thank you for that. That leaves us with the maybe less exciting job of figuring out where to put towers, Lord Banff's Deceit.
Start at Draken.
Start at Draken. I mean, it is an Amiga title. The weird twin brother of the Atari ST.
Would you rather play Draken or would you rather play Towers 1?
So, based on our very important evaluation protocol, I do not think we could get our beloved co-host Emerin Palladino to play through all of Towers Lord Banff's Deceit on stream.
Yeah, there's a certain joyful inexplicableness to the events of Draken versus like
Draken is funny.
Yeah.
Draken is funny. Towers 1 is not funny.
Towers is kind of a
and
scum.
to be clear, specifically talking about the Game Boy Color version.
Yes. Yeah, we are not ranking the PC version of this game, which is probably like fine.
It's probably fine.
Yeah. This is like when we ranked Desert Strike at HG 101, but it was the Game Gear version, and we put it very low, and everyone was like, why did you put Desert Strike below everything else on this list? And we said, look at the platform, and everyone goes, oh, okay.
Like when they ranked Resident Evil 2 for the Game.com.
Yes, I was excited. I was egging on the community with that one. And I was like, you know what? That's the correct thing. No one had noticed it was on the list already because we were pre-bunking stuff like a week or two in advance. People were not happy with me. And then they heard the episode and I was like, look at your calendars, folks. It was in April. They do one every year. It happens every April, just as a hot tip. We don't do that, but many places do. Yeah, Draken goes above this. So then you start looking at Runes of Myth Draenor version 1.4.
Look, I think I might actually play more Runes of Myth Draenor. Like, even though that thing will blow up your computer.
Yeah.
I still have that game installed. I'm thinking about playing it for Extra Life this year.
That game is functional more than Towers 1.
It's boring.
It's boring, but it's functional.
But I'm going to say right now, still goes above Virtual Highlight.
I don't know, man. I don't know. Does it go above Virtual Highlight? Because
Virtual
if you
Highlight
just
is very
run
funny.
in that game, if you run in that game, you're fine.
Virtual Highlight is...
I almost unironically like Virtual Highlight, and I think that is a real poisoned stance that I have. But I see the game in there, right? I see its soul, and I think it has a beautiful soul. But it's pretty stinky. But this might be worse. I don't know. This goes below Runes of Myth Draenor. Virtual Highlight is where I'm like really struggling.
Chris, what do you think?
So like Towers 1 is barely a video game, guys.
No, it's I would argue the opposite.
Yeah.
It's too much of a video game.
Well, it's too much game, and
Game Boy
all of
Color.
that game is basically non-functional.
It's functional. It's just not convenient or accessible.
Or clearly communicated.
I guess what I'd say is this is the Aiden Chronicles problem of like what would otherwise be a perfectly decent if unremarkable game that is hamstrung by the hardware it is on.
Yeah, that's Because I think you can say that about Virtual Highlight too.
No, Virtual Highlight is an
To an
unholy,
extent.
godless creature.
I don't think you can
sprung-
say that about Secret of the Stars, though, right?
Yeah.
Like, Secret of the Stars just has, like, bad underlying, like, the bones are bad in that
Secret
game.
of the Stars is what happens when you give a sports video game developer 6 months to make a JRPG.
I could put... Man, I would like to put this below Virtual Highlight.
Okay.
Really? Okay.
But that's
I wasn't
just me
expecting
liking
that.
Virtual Highlight more than both of
I
you
mean, Virtual
probably
Highlight
combined.
also very funny. It's like
Yeah.
Virtual Highlight has a kusoge, has that delightful kusoge sheen.
Yes, like genuine article. Like,
Kuso.
except no substitutes. This is Kuso. This has, like, fake Eurojank energy.
The developers are from Nevada. I
Yeah,
checked.
like they aspire to Eurojank, and then they released it on a Z80 based handheld, which is very European in its own way. Like, if you scrape off the labels of most Game Boy Color games, it's like French studios made 30% of the stuff on that platform. I'd put it below Virtual Highlight. How do you guys feel about that?
That's fine.
That's fine.
It still goes above Secret of the Stars.
Yeah, it's
not.
we at some point we need to get a fourth game down there and have like a proper Shitenno 4 Emperors. Because I don't know if this is necessarily it.
No.
This is just you said hamstrung technologically to an extent. I said is JV Games Inc. those purveyors of quality. Who's gonna get the credit for nominating this one?
Me.
Okay. Not your peer who you called out by name a little bit ago.
I mean, I can say, like, he did not ask me to play this. He just said, "Hey, look at this old magazine scan." And I said, "Oh." And then when we were recording last time, it popped up in my head. And now we're here.
Now we're here.
Now we're here. And now it's on the list. Congratulations to JV Games Incorporated and also to the artists formerly known as Yume Kobo, scattered to the four corners of the earth a quarter of a century ago. May your various handheld endeavors stay in pocket. May you keep a firm grip upon what you're developing. I sure don't have a great way to segue out of this one, folks.
SNK versus Capcom card battle for the Neo Geo Pocket Color.
That thing sure has a good clicky stick. So, here we are.
And thumb. And thumb. And thumb. And thumb. And thumb.
I don't know, guys. Seems like we got a lot of audience interest in Anthem.
And thumb.
Jeff, I already paid for a month of Game Pass.
All right.
Don't make me pay for one more.
I ain't gonna make you spend another $10 if you ain't gotta. Yeah.
Starfield ain't doing it for me well enough.
To the surprise of our entire audience, we are not privy to the internal operations of BioWare or anything at EA. We are privy to John Riccatello being a pillock, but that's
right, yeah.
That's just yeah. That's just some current events news, folks. But yeah, so we don't know if Anthem's actually going to get turned off very soon. But boy, the tea leaves are very, very, very bad on this one. So I think we're gonna do it. I think it's time. I think we're gonna break the glass.
I want to.
I have it installed on my personal computer.
I have it installed on my personal computer.
Yeah. What goes in the glass once we break Anthem out?
I don't know, man. There's nothing quite.
We all bought the Avengers because it was $4.
Is that still on sale? Because I did not buy it.
It is on sale until the end of the month.
Yeah, you have
6 days.
You have a week.
By the time this goes up, your chance to buy Marvel's Avengers is over.
Want to play the Avengers game?
You should buy it.
I hear it plays okay. You don't like superheroes?
Don't you want to save the world from a giant blue laser beam that's been shot into the air?
All those movies.
What if the characters made funny jokes.
What if there was a heart-inspiring, an awe-inspiring story about a coming-of-age person?
What if Joss Whedon?
What if Joss Whedon?
Listen, Joss Whedon deserves to be in jail for many reasons. But the one I care about is
That's a really good...
creating an entire generation of media.
Just a guy in like blaze orange ball cap and camo, like belly up to the bar, says, this guy belongs in prison for a lot of reasons, but the one I really care about, and everyone's like, yeah! Like, I can see it now. Just a beautiful tableau of the Mountain West.
Yeah, just me, yes.
But you're talking about Joe Biden.
Yeah. Me wearing my hunting gear.
Yeah. Just pissed off because you didn't get your elk ticket draw this year. Again. Yeah. Thanks, Obama. That's one for all the Americans out there.
That's one for a very specific group of people.
So we're going to play Anthem, a game where, incidentally, you also hunt and shoot things with guns, which is also quite American, despite it being made in Canada.
It also has Iron Man.
Yeah. Our second BioWare game. Yeah. Our third BioWare game. I forgot Jade Empire's on here.
Yeah.
Just singing the hits. The North American songbook of classic BioWare RPG. All the greats are there. Anthem, Jade Empire, Sonic Brotherhood. Like, wowzers. Okay, so that is what we will do. That will probably be up in the next 4 weeks or so. We will need to coordinate playing a game together, which will be the first time this has happened with the Off the Deep End group, and I'm dreading it. The good news is...
Wait, should we all create our characters first and then, meet up?
Yeah.
We should probably get past the character creation and then try to do something.
We will work out logistics off camera. But,
I don't remember if the game was updated long enough to actually have anything resembling late game content. It's fine.
Yeah, I wonder how long it takes to actually finish.
Oh, man.
Tell you what,
is this one of those games that doesn't quote unquote start until after you finish the main story?
Yeah,
who wants to dig around in the rotting corpse of a game? I
remember someone saying that the actual main story when the game launched was 12 to 15 hours, and then it was all the weird ancillary stuff that brought it up to 50 plus. But who knows? I mean, I don't know. I'm still thinking, what's going to replace Anthem now that we've broken the glass? I feel empty inside, guys. I'm scared.
It's fine. We still got, you two at home, you listening to this podcast. If you support the Patreon, we'll have to play Ultima 9, and the main podcast will have to play Sonic 06.
And then if we keep going, we'll have to play Andromeda. Don't forget about Andromeda.
Yep, there is an Andromeda on the horizon. Yet more BioWare really sticking it to them. We gotta
we could
look
play
around
a bad Obsidian game if you'd like.
There's that bad Obsidian. God knows there's a few of those.
Play Dungeon Siege 3.
I think the notion of doing a 360 era sort of JRPG toss about could be cool. It's just continuing to avoid one of our original mission statements, which is get people onto CRPGs.
Understanding the death of BioWare is how you get people into CRPGs, Jeff.
I mean, spoilers for the main pod, but I think people are getting into CRPGs.
I am shocked, and maybe that episode will be out by the time you hear this. But I am shocked that there seems to be relative positivity from the Joe Normals over there at Deep Listens about that there Pillars of Eternity 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
We need to go. We've been playing a lot of good games, is what I'm saying.
We have been. And, one of these was at least all right in this episode. Let's see where Anthem winds up. But that will be for next time, because I'm ending the show right now. So everyone be quiet while I read the end of the script, which says, thank you for turning into this installment of Off the Deep End. Like I said, questions and comments, prayer concerns, go to inquiries@deep.lol. You can also message us on the Discord, which you may join upon submitting money to us via Patreon. That is patreon.com/deeplistens. Again, any dollar amount is greatly appreciated. The $3 amount gets you an RPG on the slush pile. Special shout out goes to the artist known as SuperSex420 for providing us with the podcast theme music Halfway. This and other great tracks by SuperSex420 are available at bandcamp.com. See you next time, and remember, there's no such thing as cheating in a single-player game. Just make sure you have your worm light if you're playing it on the Game Boy Color. Bye.
Bye.
This episode of Off the Deep End was recorded and edited on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Nisqually or Nisqually people, who have lived on and stewarded these lands and waters since times immemorial.